Guess we need to get started here. People maybe be coming in, getting up. I'm not an early morning person myself. I think I would be, but I struggle in the mornings. I hadn't had my Diet Dr. Pepper with my coffee yet. But this morning we're going to have Sheriff's budget issues with Miss Robin DeSocio. She probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to read her bio. Robin has been a member of the Compensation Board staff since 1990 and has served as the agency's executive secretary, a staff director position that reports to the chairman of the Compensation Board. Since January of 2007, prior to this role, Robin serves as the assistant executive secretary for 2 years. She was the agency's budget and finance manager for 8 years. Over the years, she has worked closely with sheriffs and Commonwealth attorneys on special projects such as development of staffing standards and career development programs. Currently, she also participates as a member of the Board of Corrections Liaison Committee, the Center Advisory Group of the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice, and the Policy Committee of the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security's Offender Population Forecasting Process. Robin holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in economics from Virginia Commonwealth University, and something that I didn't know until I read her bio, which really stuck out to me, is she has a Master of Science degree in criminal justice, also from Virginia Commonwealth University. 2000 graduate of the Virginia Executive Institute, and just on a personal note, I've had to call down there, and she's always willing to answer your call and talk to you and give you any kind of information that you need. So let's give a warm welcome to Miss Robin DeSocio of Comp Board.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sheriff Hall. I don't know if I can move this forward. There we go. Well, good morning. There we go. Now I can see you all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. It's just been a few months since we spoke, or since I spoke with you all, or many of you, at the Virginia Sheriff's Institute Conference in June. And at that time, we did talk about an overview of budget issues following the recently adjourned 2021 legislative session. So I know that our agenda item for today is Sheriff's budget issues, but I think it would probably be most relevant today to talk about the recent action by the second special session of the 2021 General Assembly to provide federal funding for a bonus for some employees in your office. Excuse me. So the special session met very briefly from August 2nd to August 10th, and during that time they quickly went through proposals from the governor for how to spend the Commonwealth's apportionment of American Rescue Plan Act funding, which we're all calling ARPA funding. So House and Senate members proposed some amendments to the proposals from the governor during that time, and a final bill was approved by both chambers and signed by the governor by August 10th. So they worked very quickly to figure out how to spend the Commonwealth's share of the ARPA funding that the feds were passing down to Virginia. So while there was quite a bit of language and funding approved during that session related to public safety, there was one line item specifically for funding for sheriff's offices and regional jails. So funding was approved from federal ARPA funds in the current year, fiscal 22, for a one-time $3,000 bonus payment for compensation board-funded sworn positions in your office as well as in regional jails, and that includes sheriffs, sworn sheriff's deputies, and regional jail superintendents and correctional officers in regional jails. So language was also approved providing that the governor would convene a work group to look at the compensation structure for Department of Corrections, correctional officers, as well as sheriff's deputies and regional jail officers. And that group was to include the Compensation Board, the Department of Corrections, Virginia's Department of Human Resource Management, and JLARC, which is the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, which is the legislature's sort of research arm. They do a lot of studies for the Commonwealth. So, really one of the reasons for the study was because there were there was some debate back and forth about the amount of funding that would be provided and trying to look at comparability between the funding that was going to sheriffs and sheriff's deputies versus Virginia State Police versus Department of Corrections officers. So the impacts, what the language actually provides, again, funding was approved in the current year for the $3,000. Legislative intent does provide that this is a one-time bonus payment to be paid to these employees. Because this does not represent any base salary funding, this funding is in addition to and does not supplant any local funding. So any local supplements cannot be used to cover that $3,000 bonus. It is an additional bonus payment. The bonus is approved by the legislature and funded for the compensation board funded sworn positions only. It does not include funding for non-sworn civilian positions in your office or regional jails. It does not include positions like cooks, medical, dispatch, or administrative positions in your offices or in your jails. We are currently looking at some individuals that are in what we call partially funded positions. Those are positions in jails that are largely allocated for medical. And so because of that, they're not considered sworn positions, and so they were not included in the initial estimates for the cost for the program. Or for the bonus, excuse me. But we are taking a look at some of those positions. We asked you all a couple of weeks ago to take a look at those of you that have jails, to take a look at those partially funded positions to see if you actually have sworn deputies in those positions that might be doing classification or records or something like that, and not just medical. We asked you all to send that information to us by last week, and we'll be working over the next few days to make a determination as to whether we have sufficient funding to include those sworn deputies in those partially funded positions. So I do understand that for your offices, one of the most difficult parts of this bonus, it should be a great thing, right, a bonus, but one of the most difficult parts is addressing those sworn positions that are locally funded in your offices. I do want to mention that when your association first sought consideration of this funding, so the Virginia Sheriff's Association worked with the Virginia Association of Regional Jails to go to the governor and ask for a bonus for your offices out of the federal funding. So what we did was we worked through the cost scenarios for this, and we did put together funding for not just your sworn deputies, but also your civilian employees, as well as estimating funding costs for your locally funded employees, because we do know the difficulties that you all faced just last December when the General Assembly approved a $500 bonus, and that bonus did not include locally funded positions, and you all had to spend a lot of time working with your localities to get them to cover the locally funded positions. So the proposal, however, that ultimately went forward and was presented to the legislature provided for a $1,000 bonus for compensation board funded sworn positions only. During the legislative session, it was brief, but there was a good amount of back and forth. There were proposals on both the House and the Senate side to increase that bonus amount to $5,000 to match what had been included for Virginia State Police officers. There was also some language on the House and Senate side proposed by members on the House and Senate side to also include a portion of the funding for your locally funded sworn deputies. Ultimately, the Senate approved that. They approved the higher amount, and they approved language that would allow for some sharing of the funding for your locally funded positions. But once they met in conference with the House, the agreement that ultimately came out was for a higher amount. It wasn't $5,000, but it was more than the $1,000. It was $3,000, but it did not include the funding for your locally funded deputies. Specifically the discussion around this entailed the fact that the Commonwealth had its distribution of ARPA funds, and local governments each have their own distribution of ARPA funds that can be used all for the same categories of funding. And so localities had the option to consider the use of those funds to potentially provide a like bonus for your locally funded positions. I have heard from many localities, I do understand this is difficult as they try to figure out how to use their local appropriation of ARPA funds. And so I know it's difficult. Hopefully you all are having success working with your localities to get them to cover those differences. So like all funding for salaries and expenses in constitutional offices, the locality is actually responsible for paying the bonus. The compensation board can't pay that bonus directly to your employees. The local government will pay that as they would pay normal payroll expenses. And then once those amounts have been paid, we will reimburse them with the monthly payroll in the same way that we normally would. However, because the funding reimbursement for the bonus is from federal ARPA funds and not from state general fund dollars, some reporting and subrecipient monitoring by the compensation board is still going to be required. So regarding implementation of the bonus, the compensation board did approve budgeting of the funding at their meeting on August 25th. That means that these funds are now an addition to your budget. So that is something that the locality is required to fund. Implementation, however, the timeline for implementation is left flexible for the localities to make the decision as to when they can implement it. You know, every locality seems to have different requirements when it comes to appropriating additional funds for your office, whether it's, you know, advertising before they hold a meeting, advertising before they hold 2 meetings, or having a, you know, there's just a lot of different steps that every locality has to go through to appropriate additional funds. And we discovered, or, you know, back in December when we went through the last bonus, there was a lot of difficulty in localities getting everything aligned in a short time period. And so they've been provided with a little bit more flexibility to get this done. Also, there are, you know, varying manners in which payroll is handled. Some folks get paid once a month, some twice a month, some at the beginning, some at the end of the month. And so the flexibility is there for them to implement the bonus as soon as possible, but no later than November 30th. So that's something that you all should be talking with your localities about, if they're not already communicating with you about, is when they plan to provide that. And again, similar to the process for reimbursing the bonus in December, we'll provide reimbursement with the payroll once they provide that bonus to your individuals. I want to talk a little bit about the category of expense under ARPA, and this is really getting into kind of some of the weeds of the financial requirements of the federal funding. But there are 2 different categories that salary funds or bonus funds could be paid under the requirements, under the final rule for the federal dollars. One of them is just regular salary expenses, and the other is what's called premium pay. So I sent a notice out at the end of August that these were gonna be categorized as premium pay, but we're actually still working through some of that. So there are some requirements with premium pay. The premium pay under the federal rules is based upon hourly wages in excess of your normal salary. It requires an amount of up to $13 per hour and up to a certain dollar amount per year. And based upon that, I notified you all that it was likely that the folks that would be eligible for the bonus would be those that had worked at least 231 hours, which is roughly 6 weeks. It's 5.8 weeks. And so individuals that were newly hired in your office might not be eligible, but those that had been there at least 6 weeks would be eligible. We're still kind of looking at that because there are some other requirements for those with salaries at the higher end of the pay scale to provide some additional justification. So I'm actually working through with the other state agencies, DOC and state police, that are dealing with bonuses, and also with finance, with the state finance secretariat, to make sure that we're categorizing this the best way possible. So I will, in a few days, have some more information out to you all about whether or not that 231 hours is going to apply. So I apologize for any confusion over that. There are a lot of rules. If any of you all have folks that deal with federal grants, you've read through all of those rules, and there's always a lot to it. So we're still making that final determination, but I expect to have it in the next few days. Later this month, probably by next week, we'll also have some additional information out primarily for localities about the certification requirements, their certifications that they'll have to make when they pay those bonuses in order for us to be able to reimburse and properly document the federal funds. So not a whole lot to that. I'm not expecting there to be a whole lot to that, but just an extra step beyond kind of the normal how we do reimbursements. I just wanted to touch base real quickly, or just show you real quickly, the communications that we have sent out to date about this. We sent the first notice out on August 16th about the funding that had been approved, summarizing the legislative action and identifying which positions would be eligible for the funding. And then another letter went out on August 27th, confirming the compensation board's approval of that funding as a part of your budget, talking about the implementation timeline and also the potential for these premium pay extra requirements. So those two letters are out on our website if you haven't seen them or haven't received them directly. So just wanted to let you all know that those are the two things we've sent out so far. Also, there will be one more, probably two more as I respond to that issue about premium pay, and then also the certification requirements. So you can expect that over the next couple of weeks. Before we wrap up, we'll just talk real quickly about the compensation study, which was the second part of that language that the legislature approved back in August. So briefly, I just want to let you know how we're handling it. There's a very short turnaround time. Again, the compensation study was added on out of sort of looking at the differences between the funds that were provided for the different agencies for bonuses, all in public safety. So we were directed to look at compensation and report back by October 15th. So the way that this is working, the Compensation Board and the Department of Corrections are both pulling together some background information, looking at some of the historical and current statistics on things like turnover and compensation in your offices. I've asked each association, sheriffs and regional jails, to provide some input on and some feedback on concerns about compensation, as well as potential recommendations to the work group. We're taking that information and putting it together along with all of the other statistics about compensation, both from the perspective of what the Commonwealth provides as well as what your localities provide in the form of supplements. And we'll be pulling all of that together and preparing cost estimates and other relevant information for the entire work group. And then over the course of the next month, the work group will then look at all of that information from the Compensation Board and the input that you all have provided, as well as information at DOC. Virginia State Police is doing a separate compensation study, and so I think all of those things will be looked at together. Ultimately, again, all of the entities named in that budget language, us, DOC, State's Department of Human Resource Management, and JLARC, the Legislative Research Branch, will all have to pull together this report, and it'll be due October 15th. So pretty short turnaround time, not a lot of formal meetings to get together to discuss it. We're just doing a lot of legwork to pull all of the information together to really adequately be able to look at information. We're looking at information over the last 6 years in terms of compensation comparisons of what's been provided where, so that the folks who make those decisions about ultimately what to do will have everything together in one place. That's pretty much all I have for you all today. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you this morning. I've put up here our web address for recent communications. This is where you can find the letters that we've sent out about these issues if you didn't receive them in your email box. And then obviously my contact information. If you all have additional questions, we are trying to work through this with the bonus pretty quickly. But certainly any questions that you all have, I'm happy to answer now, or you can contact me later. Yes, hi Vanessa. Good morning.
Each locality receives a certain amount of money for the ARPA funds. So does the bonus for us come out of that or additional?
The bonus for sheriffs and compensation board funded deputies comes out of the state's share. So the state has an allocation, and yeah, Petersburg has an allocation, and Petersburg has to decide how to use theirs. You know, I think there was some thought that localities could use theirs to pick up those locally funded deputies. I know some localities have said, you know, that they're planning to use that for other things. It's just something they're going to have to work through, and unfortunately something you all are going to have to work through with them, and I know how hard that is. We've had a lot of calls. You know, and the association really tried to get consideration for the local funded positions because it is so difficult, but, you know, hopefully this will it'll work out for you all.
I've got, I've got a question.
Okay.
I've been, a couple of sheriffs have talked to me about this. I don't know if you have the answer, but it was some of our understanding that the salary survey, we were kind of understanding that that was going to be a comparison between law enforcement, police department, state police, comparing positions, like sheriffs making this and, lieutenants with the state police making people of comparison. Is that part of this study, or is it just looking at what we've received over the last several years? Because most of the sheriffs that I've talked to, they were under the impression that the salary survey was, we're going to be comparing apples to apples and where we're at compared to other agencies.
So I know that there was a separate study authorized or directed for state police. And I know that they've been working, and I think that originated before this most recent session, and I know that's something they've been working on. This language that came out referred to compensation review for DOC correctional officers and sheriff's deputies, but I know that between, finance and the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, that all of these reviews are happening at the same time. And so I think the goal is to look at them together. So like I said, each agency is pulling together its own information, but then ultimately we're all submitting that information. I'm not exactly sure what JLARC's role is going to be. JLARC typically does these heavy research projects, on any topic in government. But they would be, if they have the time, they would be equipped. Otherwise, they could get some additional resources to look at all of these things together in conjunction with each other. And that's my understanding of what the goal is. It's just a short time period. So because there's not a whole lot of time for massive, work group meetings, each agency is pulling together its own information so that it can then all be consolidated and compared. So I think that's my understanding. Anybody else have any questions? Well, if not, I'll be. Oh, we do.
I've got one as well.
Oh, hi.
Is there a chance, we all have a lot of turnover right now. Is there a chance, based on the meeting that you're having, that the new hires that have worked for us, the 6 weeks I'm talking about, is there a chance that we're going to be relying on localities to fund not only the county-funded positions, but also looking for the money for employees that have worked that 6 weeks?
That maybe hadn't been there,
does that
that
make sense?
hours. I do understand.
I'm talking about if they do make that hours, where you sent those hours out, is that changing? Is that the way I heard you say that?
It's possible it could change. My review of the rules, it looks like it falls under premium pay, but we don't deal with federal funds all the time. There's also a category for regular pay. This existed under the CARES Act funding too, which is there's kind of an automatic presumption that public safety salaries can be attributed to COVID, to the pandemic during this period of time. But there are also some documentation requirements of hours worked in order to use the federal funds, these specific pools of federal funds for regular salary. So that's why we were looking in the area of premium pay, but it sounds like the other agencies may be looking at just considering it regular pay, even though it is a bonus. So I'm trying to get just some answers back from them and a read through the administration to make sure that we're all handling it the same way. And if we can convert it back to kind of a regular pay where we don't have those stipulations, then it would apply to individuals who are employed at the time of implementation. So that's what I'm trying to work out.
I just want to make sure it's clearly documented from the sheriffs that if we're trying to get money for local positions and then new
Those
hires
others.
on top of it that have worked for us for 2 months, that may be a big issue.
In this group, are there a lot of offices with folks that have a lot of new hires in deputy positions recently? Well, within the last 2 months.
I mean,
So-
it just adds more people
It does.
that we've got to find
Absolutely.
funding for on the locality is all
Absolutely.
I'm pushing. Thank you.
Yeah. Am I missing anybody? Okay. Thank you all. Thanks.
Yeah, the reason I asked is you look. Thank you, Robin, for your very informative information, and enjoy the rest of your day. Sure. College now? We're going to go ahead and go to the next session, which is critical incident management in jails. Next speaker, Mr. James Martin, Vice President, Program Development, National Commission on Correctional Health Care. Jim Martin served nearly 23 years in law enforcement, serving as a lieutenant and assistant jail commander with the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office in southern Indiana. During his career with the Sheriff's Office, he served as a motor patrol deputy, a canine handler, a supervisor in the jail, and a court security unit, as well as an investigator in the professional standards unit. His duties as the assistant jail commander included serving as a command staff liaison for the jail's medical unit and a community mental health task force, and was part of a transition team during the building of the new jail facility in 2006. Overseeing the successful movement of inmates from one facility to another, Jim oversaw the converting from paper records to an electronic jail management system, to move to an electronic kiosk commissary system, and a complete transition from face-to-face inmate visitation to total video visitation. He also established a robust field training program within the jail, which led to a state-approved jail officer training school. Jim is also an adjunct professor at the University of Evansville, providing instruction in public service administration and organizational leadership. Jim currently serves as Vice President of Program Development with the National Commission on Correctional Health Care. During the last several years, he's spoken nationally on topics covering correctional health care, mental health issues, and care in our jails and prisons, tactical communications for healthcare workers, building better working relationships between custody and healthcare, and during the last 18 months served as representative for NCCHC's response to COVID-19. Welcome, James Martin.
Thank you, Sheriff Hall. You always got to be thinking. If you're not thinking, your mind is idle. An idle mind's a devil's workshop. I don't know why I wanted to start with that today, except I woke up this morning and thought, as we are talking about managing crisis situations and critical incident management, that, the idle mind is a thing you don't want to miss out on, right? I want to thank you all, Sheriff Hall, for allowing me to be here, and Sheriff Leonard for encouraging me to come. I stand in front of this esteemed organization and ask myself, what can a retired guy from Indiana possibly teach the sheriffs and law enforcement community in the state of Virginia that's actively doing the job? You heard during my short bio that I was a canine handler, but many times in my career, I also was known to have a black cat hanging around my neck. And so I think that might be where this crisis management might come into play. During my professional career, I had the unfortunate or fortunate opportunity to be a part of a C-130 crashing into a local hotel, an F3 tornado outbreak in the early mornings that hit a trailer park, and a total evacuation of our jail because inmates set it on fire. That's the incident that I will be talking about today. And I know that it is geared towards medical, a perspective from the medical view, but there are reasons why. Might also ask yourself, well, majority of the sheriffs in the state of Virginia don't have jails. but every one of you has a courthouse, and the courthouse played a very active part of our crisis incident management of that day. So that's what we'll be talking about today, and I hope that you are able to take something from it and go back to your jurisdictions. And again, thank you for allowing me to be here. And this is the most friendly Sheriff's Association I've ever been to, and I sincerely mean it. Everyone I've spoken to has been so nice. So this incident started on June 8th, 2004. Coincidentally, I had just returned from verbal judo train the trainer training. Those who know what verbal judo is, de-escalation techniques, and boy did it come in handy when I was dealing with the inmates who were living in a smoke-filled concrete and steel box with a lot of anxiety running rampant through the jail. At approximately 10 a.m., just after the second medication pass of the day, the fire alarms in our jail went off. The jail was built for about 220 inmates. We were currently housing about 350 and sometimes 400, and I know you can all relate to that have jails. The county jail is attached to our civic center, so there were, the police department was part of that building, the sheriff's office, the mayor's office, county commissioners, all sorts of city and county buildings are part of that complex. The third floor, which is where the fire started, housed our highest security inmates. And they're the ones that thought it was a great idea to pack the very back cell with any paper products and rubber products and mattresses and sheets that they could, and spark an arc from the outlets and toss it into there and catch it on fire. It makes perfect sense to me, right? Just, a place you can't get out of, let's set it on fire. Smoke quickly filled the second floor. Loud banging became rampant throughout the facility. Screaming and panic erupted as our 350 inmates on both floors started to feel the impact of what was going on. Several of the inmates, as we were evacuating the third floor, also thought it was a good idea to start fighting in that period. You never can underestimate the intelligence of our inmate population. And for my facility at that time, there was only one nurse on duty.
Looks early, like it was inmates started in what we call cell 73. It was a third floor cell.
Sheriff Brad Ellsworth says he doesn't know how they did it,
There's always possibility of smuggling matches into the facility, so it's hard to say at this point.
but he says inmates are responsible for starting the fire.
Why would you start a fire in a place that you cannot get out of?
It was then up to the sheriff's department to put their emergency plan into effect.
The Sheriff's Department definitely had an excellent emergency evacuation plan. So we got in, and right now smoke's the biggest thing. We just need to try to get it clean.
While firefighters worked to clear the smoke, the sheriff's department worked to clear the inmates.
The second floor inmates, because the smoke did travel through the building and vent system, has been evacuated into the course building.
The third floor brought up to the rooftop recreational area. But because the population is usually segregated, tempers quickly flared when they came together.
By their behavior, and we do want to get rid of them because they cause unrest with the other inmates.
So the SWAT team and K-9 units entered the building in order to peacefully remove those being forced to leave. In Evansville, Stephanie Sylvie, Newswatch 14 WFIE.
I might add a caveat that my sheriff, who later ran for Congress and went to Washington several years, my warning to him now would be think before you talk, because a lot of things in that interview just weren't true. So, it's in the smuggling and the matches. It was simply they were sparking an arc from an outlet that quickly were replaced with more safety protected outlets, and then also we stopped giving them free newspapers and board games and all the other things that they used for kindling. Again, today, like I said, I just hope that you learned something from our emergency response plan. Think about your own system and what you would do if you were faced with similar opportunities. I will discuss a little bit about the health services and custody and the relationship that it played that particular day, because there were some nuances to our response that you just wouldn't have thought to plan for. And then talk about the importance of drills. And I know that in Phoenix at the National Sheriff's Association, I talked to some of your Virginia sheriffs about how you can, actually do some disaster drills and provide some resources. So I hope that was helpful as well. So you saw the response, and the tornado I spoke about was a year after this, and you would have thought we would have learned our lesson, but this was an aerial photo just outside our jail as we were trying to evacuate those who needed to go to the hospital by ambulance, and for those who were coming in to respond. As you can see, that's a pretty crowded roadway. Getting in and out of the only area that you could get to and from our jail was blocked by police officers who took their keys with them and created a problem. So egress and regress, it could be a situation that you might want to think about if you have a mass response. And I know the state of Virginia has, and law enforcement as a whole, we're very good at responding to the unknown. And you don't have to look too far from your incident at Virginia Tech, from Newport News, the things that we respond to. But it's these long-lasting events that evolve over a day. The fire started at 10, but I guarantee you at 10 a.m., at 10 p.m., we were still dealing with the situation. So it was a very long event for us. So think about how you're going to get in and out of that scene as well. In our standards for health services, we talk about emergency services and response plan, about how a critical incident management ensures that all your staff, not just medical, but all your staff are prepared to effectively respond to it. And, the facility who does provide emergency services, their qualified healthcare professionals should be involved in that planning. So if you are a sheriff that does have a jail, when you are planning for the unknown, make sure that you're including all your staff, including the medical, because that's a very important component when they're dealing with the needs of the inmate population as well. And make sure that those areas are included in your emergency response plan. Our emergency response plan, you heard on the news, the fire chief talked about how we implemented our plan. Fortunately for me, playing a key role in the management of that day, I had actually read our policies and procedures, those 3-inch binders that you get on your first day. I actually read that because I wondered all the things that could happen in the jail. What would I do if we had to evacuate this building? But it was written back in 1960s. But the fortunate part is it still gave us a playbook of what to do. We just had to adjust some things on the fly. And the courthouse played a very important role. The courthouse was actually attached to our city-county building and our jail by an elevated bridge, and you'll see some pictures later on. So the importance of knowing what your plan is was very important and helpful for me that day. Again, if you don't have a written emergency plan, I suggest that you have someone on your staff, do that, especially with areas of the courthouse and areas of the jail might be concerned. These are just a list of things for the health aspects of the response plan. I know it doesn't pertain to most, but you can almost always replace health staff with custody staff, court staff, county, city, government staff to be a part of that and making sure that you have all the things needed for a massive response. So these are excerpts of our mass disaster critique. I might add that the only critique that was done that day was by our nurse. We talked about it a lot, but it will prove later when we talk about critiquing drills and critiquing events. She is the only one that documented it. So think about that as your role. This on-duty nurse, she immediately secured her medical office. I can't really call it an office. It was a transformed mop closet that we used as our medical office because that's just all we had at the time. But she grabbed her AED bag and her emergency response kit and immediately went to the area where the coordinated efforts were to move inmates out of the facility. But again, she was the only one that was on duty, and she stood by waiting for the influx of potential patients. She remained on the second floor. She immediately asked the desk sergeant, who was fielding a lot of phone calls at the time, to call in some of the support staff that we had at other facilities. We had a safe house that was off location to get more medical personnel there to help. That's something that we didn't think about. But then on that earlier picture that I showed you earlier, them getting to the site was hindered just because of the mere response of all the other emergency vehicles. So she called several of the health staff to come help. Smoke began filling the second floor, so a three-floor building started on the third floor. Smoke's coming down to the second floor, and filled most of the facility within 5 to 7 minutes. So our inmates on the second floor, our misdemeanors and our low-level, our inmate workers, and our female population was immediately taken from the second floor of the jail across the bridge to the courthouse. Now, if you ever were a young deputy working in the courts and had to interrupt court as it's going on and dealing with the guy in the black dress and saying, Judge, excuse me, I need you to, evacuate the courtroom. I'm getting ready to bring a bunch of inmates in. It's a pretty daunting, task to take. And he looks at me and he goes, Sergeant, we need to proceed. Can you move? I said, no, you don't understand. They are coming through the door in about 2 minutes. You need to evacuate this courtroom. Thankfully for me, he was a big golf fan and the Masters were playing, so he went back to his office and watched golf the rest of the day. But we had to, operations were happening in the jail. Obviously, operations were happening in the courts as well. You've been to your courts. You know that, a lot of people coming in for misdemeanor and traffic court. You have a lot of things for domestic court, civil process, criminal matters. When I took over court security, I always thought, man, there's going to be jury trials every day. This is going to be exciting. Well, in our jurisdiction, rarely is there an actual jury trial. This day, we had 2 of them going on. Of course, that makes perfect sense. So even interrupting the jury selection process and moving a jury trial from the location they were using to a different off-site location, those were all things that we had to deal with that particular day. Again, some more excerpts is making sure you have medical triage tags set up. We fortunately had some. This is just an example of ones you can get to quickly identify what some of the injuries were, and we did have injuries involved in this particular incident. So that's our building you see there. The jail itself was kind of that box drawn. It's on the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor. The triage treatment area was down on the ground level on the back side of the facility, medical office on the front. What you can't see is the area that we evacuated our 3rd floor inmates. Remember, those were the highest risk inmates that we had. In this facility, we had a open air basketball court that, of course, was fenced and had concertina wire on the top of it. That was the rec yard. It was July. It's a hot, humid July day. I know everyone says they have terrible humidity. Trust me, Evansville, Indiana, we have terrible humidity during the summers. We're on the Ohio River. We usually have 85, 95% humidity in the air. It's July. It was not a fun, bright, sunny day, no cloud cover. So we're bringing half of our inmate population to a basketball court. That's where the fights began. And we had 2 correctional officers at the time that were managing this movement, right? We had an elevator, but there wasn't room to have more people. The SWAT officers and the responding officers from the street coming in, they came in guns ablazing with their helmets on and all the shields, and they actually went up onto the roof overlooking the basketball court, which having that security presence there was much needed. But the way that they were aiming their guns down at the inmate population who was already agitated and the unknown and still coughing from smoke agitated the inmates more. If it weren't for those 2 officers that had great communication skills, I mean, they were the best communicators on our sheriff's office, to being able to talk and keep them calm during that time, I don't know what we would have done. Literally, they had a bucket to piss in the middle of the basketball court, because they sat there for hours before we could move them because we were fighting the fire. So it's not like we can just, daisy chain them all and walk them down the hallway. We could not move them at the time. Outside on that basketball court, under the July heat, that was the only option we had. So again, de-escalating a situation, take that into account. We finally had to tell them, you can still see them, but you don't have to agitate them at the top looking down. And it was just knucklehead stuff that they were doing. Didn't even make sense. But that's a kind of an aerial view of what the response we had that day. The black line, that's the elevated bridge that I was talking about. So the windows to the left of the picture that you see, that's the 3rd floor of the jail. That's the east side facing. It was the north side of the jail is where the fire, and that's where you saw the broken windows coming out of it. But this is the bridge that we used to take all of the inmates from the 2nd floor. We quickly evacuated them. We have holding areas that are just behind the courtrooms, but they're small. Our emergency action plan called for using the misdemeanor courtroom and the circuit courtroom, which were side by side, and we had, hallways behind it that we would move inmates. That's what the plan called for. What the plan didn't know is 40 years later, the inmate population was twice the size, so we utilized the courtrooms above and beyond that as well. So in total, we used 5 different courtrooms to secure the inmates from the second floor. The female population, which was a smaller population at the time, we were able to take them down a secure stairway and then secure them into the juvenile courtroom, which was, just below. We used the holding cells, the secure holding cells, when we had to separate people or we had keep away statuses from other inmates. So it's not like we could just jam everyone into this concrete, holding cell, because there were other unseen issues that we had to deal with. The rest, we put them in the courtroom. We sat them in the chairs that the audience would sit in, and we posted, the court security officers who were merit deputies, who carry guns, who have arrest powers. They secured on the outside security of the courtrooms. Clearly, we evacuated all the civilian personnel who were at the courtroom for the day, but also remember that this particular day, a lot of the families for those inmates who were going to court were also there. So it's not like, news broke pretty quick and we had a lot of people showing up, but families of the loved ones came and we had to deal with that push as well. So wanted to give you a picture of, the distance from where we had to go from one building to another. So we now are starting to have the first injuries. These were the first four. One was involved in the assault, of course. He didn't have to require a specific medical care. The second inmate had chest pains, and he was one that was already identified as a chronic care patient. EMS personnel were able to treat him in our triage on that bridge that I just showed you. This was the first patient that we transport to the hospital. So this is the next thing for you to think about. When you're having mass injuries in a secure facility, what is your process for taking them to a hospital? Ours, a deputy went with them to the hospital. They're still under our custody. We still have to guard them. You have multiple injuries now. You have cars that can't get in and can't leave. So think about that. What are you going to do if you have to take multiple patients from your custody population in an event like this? The third victim had smoke inhalation and dyspnea. We put them on high flow of oxygen. Again, small medical clinic, but we took everything we could. We had oxygen. We started to triage and address there. That second person was gone to a hospital. Our community, we have 3 major hospitals that we can choose from, and they're starting to go to different hospitals. So you might want to start thinking about how are we going to, maintain who's going where, so we have good accountability. One of the first things that I did when we first got the fire alarms is not knowing how long our electronic systems, our computer systems were going to work, and not knowing what the extent of the fire was going to be, was to have one of my court deputies run inmate list of the population, so we would have multiple copies of that, a hard copy, so we could keep good accountability. Again, something you might want to think about. And then the fourth victim was a detention officer who had smoke inhalation. We didn't have SCBA at the time. We do now. We didn't have that up in the hallways where they were dealing with it, and they were, the true heroes going in to get the inmates out of the smoke-filled area. So now we have one of our own that's gone down as well. They also went to the hospital. Fifth victim was having chest pain and anxiety and low blood sugar. We had to get some food, and food's going to come and be important here in just a second. But we monitored their blood sugar, and EMS monitored them and reassured them that they were going to be fine. They didn't need any additional care after the anxiety attack came down, but we had to have a special area for those patients that we identified as could be a medical concern. The sixth victim had smoke inhalation. We started them on oxygen. That patient was sent to the hospital, so now we have 3 inmates at hospitals and 1 staff member. And victim 7, inmate had seizure activity. You never know when that's going to be triggered. This was an event that triggered it. Treated by EMS personnel. That was the 5th patient, 4th inmate to go to a hospital. Now they're starting to pile up. This is another expert. All listed medical personnel assisted in the triage. We finally got people to come in that could help us. EMS were able to be there, tagging the victims and making sure that medical took turns in getting supplies. Our triage area had moved outside to the Sally Port area, fresh air to get out of the smoke. So we still had some security, but now we're kind of exposed to the outside, family members driving by or the general public. To complicate matters, time was not on our side. So I told you that it started at 10 o'clock. Our nurse had just had done a med pass and had just given insulin shots to our diabetics. What's the important thing about giving insulin shots to your diabetics is to have the food within a right amount of time. Well, our kitchen had to be evacuated. The food hadn't been delivered to those inmates yet. The timing of this incident compounded things because we couldn't give them the services that they actually needed. So think about all different times of days of how you do, on your planning. So we were able to get some things. It wasn't regular kitchen staff, but going and putting a piece of bologna on 2 slices of bread wasn't too difficult for us to figure out. But it was something that we had to do, and then continue to monitor that. Then the other part of it is when we eventually evacuated everyone to a building I'll talk about here in a little bit, is they haven't had their lunch either. Not that, missing a lunch is a big concern of ours, right? But their agitation by not getting lunch is. And so some of the simple things that we did was our building authority, get with our county garage, get some of those big orange water coolers to fill them with ice water so we could provide water to them. And I had the guy go to the local pharmacy and get some sugar-free candy so we could give them something, just to appease them at a time that was stressful. So it's the small things that we had to do until we could get them actual food. Early afternoon, the inmates on the 3rd floor were evacuated to the Civic Center. Now, we had just recently built a convention center that was right next door. That was the area that we identified. Our courtrooms were full. We had no more room in the courtrooms. We had to move the 3rd floor inmates off. Now the smoke's out. The fire department's finishing up there. Now we can move the people off of the basketball court on their outdoor recreation. But we had to also, split up our medical to make sure we had several locations where people were at now. We had to monitor them. And then we had to make sure that the new medication was handled at the appropriate time as well. So this is the convention center that we turned into our makeshift temporary jail. I remember that the sheriff, when I met him to kind of brief him on, what stages we were at with the evacuation, he gave me a set of keys and said, go open the new jail. Well, we had just broken ground on a new jail, right? I'm like, Sheriff, wait, I know it's been smoky here. What have you been smoking? He said, no, go to the Civic Center and meet with them, the personnel over there. The one thing I want to give credit, I was a sergeant at the time. He sent one of his administrative lieutenants to be the command staff member over there. And I'll never forget the comment he made when I met him. He says, I have no idea what I'm doing. Now, this is an administrative lieutenant who has never worked the road. He said, just tell me what you need. And so I appreciated that moment of clarity for him to, make sure that the area we had could have the proper security, that we posted the appropriate guards where we needed, and that he would allow me to execute the plan that we had put in place. So this is the Civic Center. 4-lane road, big open area. Your courthouse is to the left of this picture. This is a picture that's taken from the exit of the Civic Center where we would be bringing the line of inmates, the most dangerous inmates that were in our facility. What are some of the concerns that you see? There's an awful lot of open space right there. And family members were gathering in the area. How am I going to get from point A to point B? There were no underground tunnels. How am I going to do it? This is the exit. This is the south end of the Civic Center. We could go through, basement secure areas that we were out of public view. So I had to get from this door to that door safely and securely with a lot of people around. Obviously, this is not a picture of the day of the fire, but there were a lot of fire apparatus that were around, ambulances, police cars, the public who had been, the court personnel who had been evacuated from the facility. They're still hanging around trying to figure out what they were going to do. So that's the issue that I had. And so I looked around and, seeing all of these big red fire trucks, I was like, you know what? I could, from point A to point B, make a heck of a gauntlet with these fire trucks. And so that's what we did. We bumper to bumper on both sides of the road created a tunnel so our inmate population being moved from those locations were out of sight and out of hearing of the family. Does that mean that we didn't still have the cat calls and the people, tell them, well, I love you? Yeah, that still occurred, but at least it was as safe as we possibly could. We had more injuries that came out as they continued to suffer from the heat that was up on the 3rd floor. So the medical concerns didn't stop after the smoke cleared from the jail. We had to continue to manage that. Other things were the medication rounds. We talked about that earlier. Once our medical staff could get back into their office, we started pre-planning for the medications in the early afternoon and into the evening, knowing that we weren't going to be back in that jail. Again, this is tailored for a medical group, but those who have jails, you have medical, these are the things they need to be thinking about. So these are some of the pictures from it was a pretty green paint too that they messed up. These are the pictures from the cells. You've seen how cells look now. Now it's all open squad bays, right, and housing areas. These were cells. These are barred doors that are sliding shut, have to use the keys, old style, and you can start seeing some of the blistering on the paint from the event. Again, they used mattresses, they used books, they used newspaper, they used anything they could to stack things in that one cell at the very back of the area, and you can see how hot it burned and created quite a bit of smoke. Just a heck of a day, and that's what the cause was. From their hot pot with, I think, staples from a magazine, creating the arc. As smart of the incarcerated population is, I wish they would have done something a little bit more smarter than doing that. Just a heck of an event that day. So talking about the drills, you want to just be prepared. For our standards, so and we have some accredited facilities that are possibly in the audience, we require mass disaster drills to be conducted on each shift. So over a period of 3 years, each shift has participated in it, right? That seems awful low over a 3-year period, but it's important to not just do the same drill over and over again. They get used to that. You're like, oh, the kitchen's on fire. Let's go respond to the kitchen. Mix it up. Think of the unthinkable things that could happen and make it fun for the drills themselves. But make sure each shift is covered, because it doesn't only happen on day shift. Our plane crash was in the they were doing touch and goes when the C-130 hit that happened about 11 o'clock in the morning. The fire was at 10 o'clock. The tornado was at 2 a.m. in the morning. We're not immune to what hour we can pick when our disasters are going to happen. But also do emergency man-down drills. Again, this is for your medical personnel. Someone that just falls out to a seizure, how are you going to respond? They need to practice for that stuff too. The mass disaster drill, by our definition, is a simulated emergency that could potentially involve a mass disruption. That could be an inmate that's popped your sprinkler head. It disrupts the activities of the jail. You have to evacuate visitors. You have to get the fire department. You have to shut off the water. You have to suspend everything that's going on. Could be a disaster drill on how you would respond to that. But most times it does frankly involve natural disaster, internal disaster, or an external. These are just pictures and news things. This was from probably 5 years ago, but I know, I think it's Monroe County, Key West. They get hit with hurricanes all the time. They had to evacuate their jail because of an impending hurricane. That is a natural mass disaster. External ones, we have ICE detainees going in and filling up on our border states. That's a disaster, having to figure out how to manage, mass disruption of your facilities. The man-down drill, as I told you about, those are the medical emergencies that your staff might find in the jail. But it also could happen in the courthouse. If those that provide security, they're going to be the first responders when a member going to court, civilian personnel or staff member falls out. You're going to be the ones that they call. So think about those kind of trainings on how you would manage that situation. Critiques. I told you the one takeaway that I got is our nurse did a critique, but no one else on the command. We talked about it a lot. We had meetings, and we came back early the next morning to talk about how it went the day before, but we didn't put it down. We got lucky that, as we planned on and we were building our new jail, we started thinking about how would we do it at the new jail now, because now we're not attached to the courthouse. I don't have a courthouse to evacuate inmates to. What am I going to do? I've got a railroad track right behind it. I could put them in boxcars and take them up to our 4-H center. But, different facilities require different changes to your plan. So I know a lot of sheriffs are building now. Think about that as you're building. What would be your evacuation points? What would you do at the courthouse if something like this happened there? Make sure you're critiquing them, and make sure you share it with the staff. That's the other problem that a lot of facilities do. They don't share it. They'll talk about it in the command staff meetings, but they don't pass it down to the person, the frontline workers who are actually going to manage it and do it. So think about the critiques that you need to make as well. So these were some of the suggestions that we needed. We needed to set up triage quicker. We thought that we wanted duplicate copies of the triage tags, so we knew, our triage tags were one card, right? We put it on the patient goes away. We didn't have documentation of like, now what did we just send to the hospital? So having copies of those, making a carbon copy, that's something that we realized that we needed to do. We needed to designate a person in charge of coordinating and overseeing all the medical care. We had a limited medical staff, but when those that were coming in to help augment that, we needed to have one single person that can just watch as things are going on, not necessarily be hands-on, but control the flow of going on, managing it, not reacting to it. And then also the mass disaster instructions in our emergency jump kits. We realized that, when you're in this critical incident, sometimes you don't think about the most simple things. So when having a plan to reference would be nice to be in your response gear. Having a list of the emergency phone numbers and the staff that you need to call in would be nice to have it right there. Back in that day, no cell phones weren't as prevalent as they are now, so you can't just, hit the redial on your contact list. But still having those phone numbers to the extra ambulance services that are in town, those that you need to call. The C-130 crash, we had about 6 or 7 different ambulance services coming. The ones that, you dial 911 for were busy. So those are the things. Who are the external partners that you might need? And include them in part of your planning. Do tabletop discussions. Include the fire department. Include the building authority. Include your emergency management office. Those people can be very helpful to you in these times. Also, that we have the mass disaster folder, develop the plans with the medical equipment that you would respond with, and all the extra papers and pens that you don't seem to have enough of when you're trying to document what's going on. Again, our medical personnel was smart enough to actually develop a mass disaster documentation. Simple things of, who is present, what was their role, how can we do things better. These were things that we developed after learning what we did not have and should have had. So think about that as well, just documentation. If it's not documented, it didn't happen, right? And again, just more excerpts of that. All of these were shared with medical staff, and we were able to improve our planning for the next thing, which of course we did. Just some things to include, make sure your response time, the names and titles of the people, what their role was, what they actually did, observations, document the good, bad, and the ugly. This is the time to talk about the good, bad, and the ugly. And be honest with yourselves. If something didn't work, talk about it so you can fix it. And those staff members who weren't present or are part of the response, make sure that they know what happened and read about it as well. Get the firsthand account from the people that did. We talked about this a little bit already, but make the drills realistic. If you're just doing a drill to say you did a drill, it's probably not a good planning. Actually do the work. Tabletops are great, but they don't replace actually going through the motions. We did a suicide prevention drill in our facility. We actually put one of the resuscitation dolls into one of our holding cells in booking. We put when it was slow, we put a sheet around the neck and hung it from one of the hooks on the wall in the cell. And the poor officer that came by first, we had cameras. Of course, we had the closed caption cameras in the cell. We also put some GoPros in there so we could hear and see the sounds. Brand new officer, had just been on the sheriff's office for about 6 months, walking in, got called in early, hadn't even dropped his lunchbox down. Walks by there, and on camera you can see the double take of, what in the heck did I just see? But they didn't snap into action right. He was like, Sarge, I think I've got something in this cell. And he just kind of stood there and looked at it. Recognizing, well, that's kind of weird, but we had to prompt him, okay, what are you going to do next? And then the light switch went off, and he started getting involved. The nursing staff responding were kind of just watching and laughing because here he is working on this resuscitation doll, and they didn't think they had a role to play until he said, what are you going to do? You're the medical staff. Get involved. And it was just encouraging him to do it. So if you don't actually go through the motions of your drills, they're just going to sit back and watch. So get them involved. Allow them to start planning them and share the information. So continue to practice again and again and again. Because if plan A doesn't work, you better have a plan B. Our plan A didn't work because we had more inmates than our plan in 1960 called for. So we had to go to our plan B. And there's probably going to be a plan C and a plan D and a plan ZZ as much as you have to go. So be prepared for those. We talked about some of the provisions already for what they needed. Making sure that you're prepared for the surge of patients. So these are the things that you already know and already do. I want to pause for a second. No one likes talking about ICS and NIMS and how that was forced on us as sheriff's offices after Katrina and after the Homeland Security was established. And the incident command system and national incident management system were, you know, the sheriffs have to do this training to be able to be eligible for federal funding if a disaster comes. But this was an excellent tool that came out of that planning. And most of your ICS came from the Fire Response Service in California, CAL FIRE. So if you've not participated in those kind of trainings, send people to these type of trainings. You can do it online. You can send them. Anniston, Alabama has a training center that's not too far from here. Excellent places to receive some training on disaster preparedness. But the planning P is just as simple. It's just a simple reminder to be able to plan for an event or to use it to guide you through an event. And it talks about, you know, having objectives that you want to meet during this incident action plan that you have. And then reviewing things as you're going along, testing it to make sure that your plan's working, preparing for the next action period that you're going to have to go through. It might not just end in one day. The tornado, we were there a couple weeks. Family members wanted to go back in and collect their belongings, and as they got onto a school bus for us to drive them in, the sheriff was handing them paper grocery bags. They said, "You don't understand, we want to get a lot of our stuff." And he had to look at them and said, "There's nothing left." It was a trailer park. It was gone. It was literally a concrete slab was left. So it's those kind of things that you're going to have to continue to plan for and think about how you can do it better the next evolution of your plan. And include your healthcare staff, include your command staff, include your first line supervisors, include the people who are actually implementing your plan. And do these drills and list the emergencies as they, you know, as you can think about what might be something that you're going to have to respond to. So planning together takes everything to plan for your disaster planning. It'll require coordination with your community supporters, your health department. We've all, if we've learned nothing else during the last 18, 24 months of how much we have to depend on our health departments and our state and local and federal partners for any sorts of contingencies that you have to deal with. So make sure that you look at those options and look at those professionals to help you plan it. I was talking that you had some search and rescue people from your Alabama emergency management system here in the exhibit hall. And I know that you have county emergency management personnel in each of your counties. So look to them for some of the resources that you might be able to have as well. You know, they're great wealth of information. Practice drills will help you identify any of the weaknesses in your plans. Classroom exercises and tabletops are great, but it never will replace, you know, actually doing it. So practice like you play and plan for the best, but prepare for the worst. So that's the end of I realized when I saw the schedule that I was the one thing keeping you from going home. So, you know, out of respect for that, I didn't want to just sit up here and babble. I tend to do my best instruction while I tell a story. So I hope the story of our fire and our evacuation might give you something to think about. I did want to take an opportunity real quick. I left some, you know, NCCHC would put out a suicide prevention resource guide. And so for those that have jails, I've left some copies of those in the back. If you'd like to have one of those, it's just, again, something to think about, suicide precaution. One of your highest liability areas in your jails. And if you are a sheriff that has a jail and you'd like to come up, I would be happy to give you one of our resource guides so you can see all the things that we have. And the one last thing I want to talk about, for those that do have jails and have health services, we have partnered with Harvard University to do a study on our standards for health services and the accreditation process to kind of give me a report card. So when I talk to sheriffs across the country, it says, standards and accreditation will help reduce your liability, it'll improve your care, it'll cut your cost. This study will prove my point or identify areas that I need to improve myself. So see me, we're getting ready to finish the recruitment for those facilities and hope to start the process at the end of the month. If you're a facility that has medical care in your jail, I'd love to give you a flyer about that and see if it's something that might interest you. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I just really want to thank you all for letting me be here and address you today. And I hope something that you heard today might help you go back to your facilities and to your courthouses and to your communities. The only thing that I will leave you with is please stay safe. God bless you all for what you do. I know this is, our profession's taken a hit the last couple of years. So I encourage you all to stay with the fight and keep doing the good things that you're doing. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheriff. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Jim. Great presentation. Appreciate you coming from Indiana. I guess this is, ends the conference. We'll adjourn until April, the spring conference in Norfolk. I believe it's April 20th, 2022. Thank everyone for coming, and the board of directors, if you would immediately report to the second floor, Pocahontas room, we can get the board meeting going, and then everyone can head on home. But thank you guys for attending and coming, and it's great to see you, and hopefully we'll see you in April.
Let me dial up the weather. Got the whole crew here. I ain't seen some of them in forever. It's one of those never forget it, better stop and take it in kind of scenes. Everything's just right, yeah, except for one thing. You should be here, standing